Welcome to Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. We have a lot of new information, groundbreaking news that has not been made public yet. I want to go over some of the cases that we filed this week and then talk about the current terrorist threat and how that seems to be multiplying as we speak. First of all, we filed a lawsuit this week, as I promised many times in the past, against former FBI Director James Comey, against the FBI, the NSA, that's the National Security Agency, CIA, and others over illegal mass surveillance. I did that on behalf of not just myself, but my client Dennis Montgomery, a whistleblower, an NSA contractor who left with 47 hard drives, over 600 million pages of information. He gave that to the FBI under claims of immunity. Comey promised to supervise the investigation himself, and it's quite clear that now, after 2 years of having that information in its possession, the FBI has covered up this investigation. And as we allege in this complaint, and you can find it at freedomwatchusa.org, freedomwatchusa.org, Comey buried this investigation because the FBI has been doing this illegal surveillance itself. And what Montgomery would tell the FBI, and he did tell the FBI under oath for over 3 hours, it's been videoed, is that not just President Trump when he was a businessman, but the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, other justices, over 156 judges, yours truly, and other prominent Americans have been surveilled. Now, that's on top of everything we've learned in the last few weeks about what the FBI has been doing illegally. And that was broken by Circa News. In fact, you'll find on our website at freedomwatchusa.org an article by Circa News that came out on the day that we filed suit. Now, I also filed suit because since we've been pushing to get a congressional investigation, and Mr. Montgomery has offered to come forward with the information that he has to the House Judiciary Committee, the House Intelligence Committee, the Senate Judiciary Committee, and the House Intel Committee, the FBI, through James Comey, is alleged to have been surveying us, wiretapping our phones. I've had to get 3 cell phones just in the last few months, and Mr. Montgomery has had his computer attempted to be hacked on a number of occasions. Now, this is nothing new, and you'll have to read the complaint to really see what it is we're saying. So go to that website at freedomwatchusa.org. We also need your contributions because we're taking on very powerful interests here. And it's ironic that as Comey comes forward this week and has testified that President Trump has obstructed justice in effect, that he himself obstructed justice at the FBI by burying the investigation of Dennis Montgomery, who he's harmed a great deal. You know, Montgomery has a brain aneurysm, and he's been mistreated. And this is also in the complaint, which asks for large damages. So this is something new this week. This is something you're only hearing on Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Now, we also brought, as I forecast on several occasions, a lawsuit against the University of California at Berkeley, against George Soros, that evil, self-hating Jew during World War II who collaborated with Nazis. You know, I'm of Jewish origin myself, so I don't mean that in any way that's anti-Semitic. But this guy's really bad. He's actually a real evil force against the Jewish people. And Janet Napolitano, who's the president of the University of California system, and others, for a violent protest that occurred after a reporter from Breitbart News sought to speak a few months ago at the University of California at Berkeley. Now, it's very important that you look at that complaint, again, at freedomwatchusa.org, because this complaint will tell you exactly what's going on in the country today. In fact, just last weekend, there was a violent protest. Pro-Trump people were just simply peacefully gathering in Portland, Oregon, and they were attacked by leftists, anarchists, communists, and others in that city. And it wasn't pretty. And this is what's happening throughout the country. There's a real threat of a revolution in this country these days, and we're seeking to quash that through these legal actions. You know, we believe in peaceful, nonviolent revolution, but the left in this country, supported by the likes of CNN, MSNBC, The Washington Post, The New York Times, The Huffington Post, and all these leftist rags, are whipping up this violence and inciting violence. Black Lives Matter, of course, is part of that, too, and the people around them, like Louis Farrakhan of the Nation of Islam. And somebody has to put their foot down, and this very valiant woman by the name of Kiara Robles, who was beaten up during the time that she was just simply there to go to a speech of the reporter of Breitbart. And you can see the video of that. It's not even in contest. She came forward and brought a lawsuit, and we're representing her at Freedom Watch. It's a super important lawsuit. And it kind of fits in with everything that's going on, not just with regard to Comey and the FBI and the intelligence agencies. It fits into the fact that our country is exploding, that attempts are being made to destroy President Trump and his presidency. The left is doing everything it can to take this country over and using whatever means at its disposal. And Freedom Watch is your line of defense. We are your private Justice Department. And that's why we have the show, because I need to sound the clarion call that we need to rise up against these forces of evil, much like someone should have risen up against the Bolsheviks in 1917 when they waged a revolution in Russia and turned it into the evil empire that Ronald Reagan talked about, which came crashing down only in the 1980s during the Reagan administration. Of course, it's back with President Vladimir Putin. But that's something that we need to look at and we need to focus on. And then during this week's episode, we're also going to talk a little bit more about the Bundy case, because this prosecution of Klayman Bundy, and I'm representing Klayman in a number of capacities. I'm seeking to get into the criminal case in Las Vegas, Nevada. The judge who was recommended by the corrupt mafia-connected Senator Harry Reid and then appointed by Barack Obama is committing a lot of acts of prejudice against the defendants in that case. You know, Klayman at the outset of this case was committed to solitary confinement. So were his sons along the way here. He was denied right of counsel, which was me coming into the case, and I'm still fighting to get in because Klayman's coming up for criminal prosecution. There was evidence that was let in that should never have been let in. There was evidence that was excluded, which should have been included. This Judge Navarro absolutely hates Klayman's guts, and she's doing the bidding, we believe, of Harry Reid, who recommended her for appointment. You can see all of this at KlaymanBundyDefenseFund.org. You can see the background, but we also need your contributions to defend Klayman, because basically they've taken away his land. Even Obama, on his way out of office in 2016, claimed all of Klayman's land for a national monument, preventing him from grazing in the future. The women in the family are tending to the ranch. Many ranchers in this area have been driven out of business. But Klayman's fighting, and he's fighting not just for himself, but he's fighting for you. And therefore, I brought on this week Congressman Bob Barr, who's a friend of mine, who was formerly U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. He was a congressman. I worked with Bob in introducing articles of impeachment against Bill Clinton back in the 1990s. Bob is the only person in Congress who I could ever trust while he was there. Now he's back in private practice. But I want you to hear what he has to say about the constitutional horrors that have been perpetrated upon the Bundy family, ranchers in that area in Nevada and elsewhere throughout the West, and everybody who's involved, because it's also the American citizens. You know, Klayman didn't just, fight against the federal government. He exercised Second Amendment rights of defense, right to bear arms. When people saw that his sister was assaulted and thrown to the ground by Bureau of Land Management agents, when they saw that his two sons were tased, that his dog was viciously kicked and harmed, that his cattle, particularly the bulls, which help you raise a herd, which you need to earn a living, many of them were killed and buried in a secret mass grave. When they saw that, they came to Klayman's ranch in Bunkerville, Nevada, peacefully, but they were armed because they thought that the Bureau of Land Management, which was then being run by a hand-picked person by Harry Reid, who had been his chief of staff, could harm them and could harm the Bundys. Now, none of these protesters, peaceful protesters, ever harmed a hair on the head of any government agent, but yet it was the Bundy family that was viciously assaulted, beaten up, and their livelihood effectively destroyed. And that's why they need your help to contribute to their legal defense fund, because it's very expensive. This trial is likely to last 3, maybe even 4 months. And Klayman needs to be acquitted, not just for you. He faces the potential of life imprisonment, but also for all the American people, because we can't have this heavy-handedness in the federal government. And this government is still being controlled, the deep state of Barack Obama. These Justice Department prosecutors are Obama people, and they won't lay off. And we need to rise up and exercise our Second Amendment and First Amendment rights. I want you to listen to what Bob Barr has to say, and we're going to bring him back on later shows. And then we're going to talk about terrorism today, because, you know, the president has before the Supreme Court now a case involving the so-called travel ban. It's not. It's just a moratorium on immigration from certain Muslim countries. It needs to be enforced. The Supreme Court is being asked to take off a stay that was put on by liberal hack justices in lower courts in Hawaii, in Oregon, and elsewhere. And the judge that's on that case, one of the Supreme Court justices, is Justice Ginsburg. And we're going to talk about that because she has a conflict of interest. She can't continue on this case. So we're going to be back shortly with this show. This is a very important show. It's something that you need to listen to carefully. And go to our website at freedomwatchusa.org. Donate to our cause. See what we have to say. Be informed. We are your private justice department. There is no other line of defense other than Freedom Watch. I'm the only lawyer who ever got a judgment that a sitting president committed a crime. I'm the only lawyer who can do this job. God bless you. We're going to be right back with our show, and we wish all of you the best on this weekend.
Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
Fearless.
He's Klayman, he's crazy, he's racist, he's out to kill the Democrats.
Dangerous.
Don't care, he uses the court and the law.
Lethal.
This is bad.
Special Prosecutor
Very bad.
Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
Welcome back to the Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. I have on the line a very good friend of mine, probably the only person I ever trusted in Congress, and that goes to today. He was the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, later Congressman from Georgia. Bob Barr is the one who introduced articles of impeachment against Bill Clinton, which ultimately resulted in his impeachment. And I worked with Bob while I was running Judicial Watch back in the late 1990s. I brought Bob on today so he can comment about Klayman Bundy and his prosecution, because it's a very important case. We talked about that last week. And I wanted to get Bob's take on this, why it's so important, not just for Klayman and his family, but for all of the American people. Bob, welcome to Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman.
Thank you, Larry. It's always good to be with you, not only because you're a very, very good friend, but more importantly than that, it means that you're involved with a case or an issue with very important constitutional ramifications. And the Klayman Bundy case that's pending out in federal court in Nevada certainly is a case that raises fundamentally important constitutional issues, as you say, not just for the Bundy family, not just for ranchers, not just for the people of Nevada, but the people of America. The ramifications of the Bundy case go far beyond the geographic borders of Nevada and raise very important issues that all of us need to pay attention to, that raise questions about just how much actual control the federal government can arbitrarily assert against an individual.
Well, tell us what happened here, because you've been well briefed on the facts, and we know that, of course, Harry Reid's hand-picked chief of staff was inserted in the Bureau of Land Management. They claim that Klayman owes money for grazing fees. Klayman claims that the grazing fees, if any were owed, it was to the state of Nevada, not to the federal government. But despite that, a raid was perpetrated on the Bundy Ranch, which they've ranched for over 150 years. It was violent. The lives of the Bundy family were threatened by these federal agents of the Bureau of Land Management and other mercenaries that were hired. Klayman's sister was tased, she was kicked and violently thrown to the ground. His sons were tased. His dog violently kicked and harmed, and some of his cattle, particularly the bulls, which you need to raise a herd, were killed and buried in a secret mass grave. So my take on it is that even if you owe the federal government money, it doesn't give them the right to come in and use excessive force, threaten your lives, beat the heck out of you, and in fact terrorize your family. And that's, to me, fundamentally what's involved. But from the legal standpoint of it, with regard to jurisdiction, with regard to other issues, Bob, I'd like the listeners to get your take on it.
The federal government, Larry, of course, would like the public to think that this is a simple, open and shut case involving armed citizens who conspired to and actually threatened federal agents. And if, of course, you just look at it in that light, based on the government's oversimplification of the issues, one could easily come to the conclusion that the federal government is right here. Nothing could be further from the truth. There are very fundamental issues here involving land rights, involving states' rights. Can the federal government simply come in and arbitrarily say, hey, we're going to take over ownership of 90% of the land in the state of Nevada, and therefore we can assert control over what people do and who needs to pay us, that is Uncle Sam, for what the government considers the privilege of coming onto or grazing one's cattle on that land. The Bundys and other law-abiding Americans stood up to that fundamentally misassertion of federal authority by the federal government. The fact of the matter is also, as you've indicated, even if one assumed that the federal government is in the right here, which I do not, even if one assumes that, there are very important issues about how the government went about asserting its control. If the government wins this case, not only will it establish a very unfortunate precedent for government assertion of arbitrary control over land in the state of Nevada or any other state for that matter, but it will also stand for the proposition that the federal government, if it believes that it's in the right, can use all sorts of violent tactics to assert its authority.
We're run out of time here. I'm going to bring you back on a subsequent episode. But it's important for people to go to KlaymanBundyDefenseFund.org, KlaymanBundyDefenseFund.org, see what happened, donate to our cause. Klayman's going into trial shortly. He needs your support. God bless you.
And now, 4 words that make corrupt politicians make wee-wee in their little pants.
Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
To support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
I want to talk now about judges, the selection of judges, why it's so important. And I want to do that to start with the context of what's going on at the Supreme Court right now. We know that various lower court judges, liberal judges, leftist judges in the Ninth Circuit and elsewhere have enjoined, that is, ordered to stop, to not go into effect, President Trump's temporary moratorium on immigration from 6 predominantly Muslim countries. And in light of what's going on in Europe these days, in England, where we had a terrorist attack earlier this week, in France, where we had another one more likely to come, because literally continental Europe has been infested with Muslim terrorists over the years. They've opened their doors. They have allowed for this immigration. They've destroyed their continent. You know, and I'm a Europhile. I'm an international lawyer. I went to school in France as a young man when I was at Duke University. I later studied at the Institute of European Studies in Brussels, Belgium. I worked for the European Union, then the European Community as an intern. And I still have international clients. But I'm really saddened by what's happened in Europe. They really have destroyed themselves. They've destroyed themselves from within. And this summer, I doubt there's going to be much of any tourism. It's going to just get worse and worse and worse. You can't sit in a cafe without thinking that it's going to be blown up by an ISIS terrorist or a sympathizer of ISIS or any other terrorist group such as Al-Qaeda. And that's the reason for President Trump's so-called travel ban. It's not really a ban, it's just a moratorium. And these lower courts have stopped the implementation of it. So therefore, the Justice Department, under Attorney General Jeff Sessions, hopefully he's got better people now representing him at the lower level. He had these Obama loyalists before, basically, who I think intentionally sabotaged these legal arguments. I listened to them. I mean, one of the lawyers sounded like lawyer in My Cousin Vinny, the one that stutters, the public defender. I mean, it was just simply embarrassing. But now, presumably, he's got good people in there, and he's asking the Supreme Court to take off this stay. Now, who's on the Supreme Court? Among the various judges, including the new judge, Neil Gorsuch, is Justice Ruth Ginsburg. First of all, she's an ultra-leftist, but that's not a basis to disqualify her. But what are several pejorative, frankly insulting and prejudicial statements she made about President Trump when he was running for the presidency and thereafter. She even told him to go live in New Zealand. And she can't sit on this case. But here's what's really interesting and really troubling, is that about a few years ago, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, who, of course, is the one who brought us Obamacare with his still inexplicable decision, a so-called conservative, when issues arose at that court about conflicts of interest of judges, it was Justice Sotomayor and Justice Thomas dealing with, in fact, the Obamacare case. And when both the left and the right asked them to recuse themselves, I don't believe that there was a reason for Justice Thomas to recuse, but there was for Sotomayor, because she was, in fact, Solicitor General of the Obama Justice Department and helped formulate Obamacare. So she had a direct conflict of interest. She was, in fact, presiding on the same matter that she had advocated for as Solicitor General of the United States in the Justice Department. She refused to get off the case. I then filed an ethics complaint at the Supreme Court, and that was not acted upon. They just sat on it. The ethics complaint was just simply to have her recuse herself. But a few months later, or a few weeks later, rather, Chief Justice Roberts came forward with his annual report. The Supreme Court does an annual report each year. And he said that Supreme Court justices, since they're confirmed by the Senate and their background investigated, must be beyond reproach. And therefore, their ethics are not to be questioned, or anything they do is not to be questioned. Nobody can do anything about it, short of impeachment. Of course, they would ultimately rule in their own impeachment if that ever happened. Convenient, huh? And he said that we're not liable, we don't have to adhere to the Code of Judicial Conduct for federal judges. In fact, we think it might even be unconstitutional as applied to the Supreme Court. And he exempted the Supreme Court from all of this. Now, Justice Ginsburg has to get off the case in terms of considering whether the Supreme Court should lift the stay, but there's no requirement that she do so. There's no enforcement mechanism, and that's the problem here. Now, we at Freedom Watch, and you can go to our website at freedomwatchusa.org, are going to be submitting yet another ethics complaint if she doesn't get off forthwith. And we're going to also be filing amicus curiae, a friend of the court briefs, to make that point. But this is a situation where the Supreme Court justices themselves believe and act as if they're above the law. Now, obviously, it would be an advantage to have Justice Ginsburg not to rule on this case, because it would then go to 8 judges, and 5 of those judges would be conservative judges, and notwithstanding the fact that some of them can't be counted upon, such as the Chief Justice himself, who tries to curry favor with the left from time to time, this is the way it should be. This is the state of affairs at the Supreme Court. And, there are some good justices up there. I love Justice Thomas. I think he's a good man, and Justice Alito, and I hope that Gorsuch pans out as well. But they really have this imperial attitude where they believe that they can't be touched. And you can't have that in a republic. You can't have that in a democracy. But it's not just them. Let's look at lower court judges at the district court level. Let's look at judges at the appellate level, the circuit level. They are appointed for life. And I believe that we need a new system. And I proposed that years ago. And, of course, we are also proposing a new Constitutional Continental Convention that Judicial Watch is going to sponsor next year in Philadelphia, because, the Founding Fathers, they were enlightened by God, but they weren't God, and they made certain mistakes. It's normal. Human beings make mistakes. And one of those mistakes was the way federal judges are appointed, both at the lower court level, at the circuit court appellate level, and frankly, even at the Supreme Court level. They're appointed on the basis of patronage. The president nominates them, and the Senate confirms them, and it's a political process. We don't always get the best and the brightest. What, frankly, we get are politicians in robes. Judges who, based on their own personal beliefs, frequently rule in favor of the position that they favor. And that's not just true with regard to leftist judges. It's also true with regard to conservative judges and libertarian judges and other judges. But leftist judges are the worst example. because, frankly, they believe in a living constitution, a constitution that evolves as they see fit. And generally, conservative judges believe that the Constitution should be read as written. If you don't like it, then amend it. And that's, in fact, what we're proposing. So what I'm suggesting that we do, because particularly since we have 70 to 80% of lower court judges and appellate judges now Clinton and Obama appointees, and they're running wild. It's like girls run wild, except that they're in their clothes and in their robes. God knows what's underneath their robes, but they're in their robes. But the reality is that they are perverting the Constitution. They're harming us, and it is destroying the country, particularly in a situation where the executive branch has been paralyzed by the attacks against President Trump. The legislative branch is off politicking and getting on either Fox News, CNN, or MSNBC. That's their primary concern, rather than doing the people's work. So I came up with a 5-part proposal in the way judges should be selected. Number one, they should be recommended by merits panels that evaluate their qualifications without regard to politics. Number two, they should have to take a course on how to be a judge. You know, tax lawyers go for what's called an LLM, a master's degree, even after lawyers get their Juris Doctor, that's their doctorate degree, to become real specialists in tax law. Well, it's important for judges not just to be judges, but to understand how to be judges. Because we take people out of private practice, we take them out of government, we take them, from corporations and unions, and all of a sudden they're judges. It's kind of like the movie Dr. Strangelove, where Dr. Strangelove, played by Peter Sellers, who was kidnapped and drafted into the American government for national security purposes to develop a defense to the Russian doomsday machine and other things. Every time he saw the president, he raised his hand in a Heil Hitler because he had worked for Hitler. He forgot that he was working for the American government. Well, there was some humor in that in Dr. Strangelove. There was an irony, of course, but there's no humor of it in judges. So when judges take the bench, they frequently don't understand that they're no longer in private practice or with corporations, that they're no longer a defense lawyer or a prosecutor, and they wear not just their legal background on their sleeve, but their politics. So I suggest that judges, before they can even be considered, future judges, go to a judge school run by a university or universities, and they learn how to mete out justice and the appearance of justice, because that's what's really important. It's the appearance of justice, because when people see that judges are representing their own proper interests rather than their own, you lose faith in the legal system, and if that happens, the whole system collapses. That's what happened in the days leading up to the Revolution in 1776, when King George III reclaimed our criminal justice system back to the court of King James and took it away from the colonialists. That was the primary purpose upon which the Revolution was waged, notwithstanding what we talked about earlier in the show with regard to busting into people's houses, beating and raping up their women and families, such as occurred to some extent with Klayman Bundy in recent history. So there's that. And we also think that judges, and this is what I've proposed, should be psychologically tested before they become judges, because many judges take the bench. Maybe they're unhappy with their wife or husband the morning before. They pontificate from the bench. They wear their prejudices on their sleeve. And frankly, I've encountered many over the years, including one in Los Angeles, William D. Keller, who was both an alcoholic and unstable. And that's what actually caused me to start Judicial Watch back in 1994, my experience with this judge. There are more than you think on the bench who, frankly, are not capable of being judges. And last but not least, we need a system, because ordinary people can't always afford to take appeals when judges make intentional or reckless decisions. And we need a system whereby, perhaps through arbitration panels, they can get relief if a judge throws their case out, scratching the back of a vested interest. I've seen it on many occasions. I usually represent the underdog, and they simply can't afford to take an appeal. So the government should get these judges insurance. There should be arbitration panels that can decide if a judge has made a grossly negligent or intentionally wrong decision on the basis of politics or his own personal predilection for indigent people who cannot afford to take appeals. It's very important. I remember when I was running Judicial Watch, and of course I'm the founder, and now I run Freedom Watch, and I'm the founder of that as well. And when I ran for the U.S. Senate in Florida, I would go around talking about judges. And I would get a tremendous response from people because everybody's had a bad experience in our courts, whether it's in the family court system where judges can take children away from families and where they think they're God, and frankly, most frequently favor female interests over male interests because there's a bias in that regard, and I'm not favoring one or the other. It should be neutral. Or whether it's in other aspects of our legal system where they're seeking justice against powerful interests. The American people understand that we need better judges, and the Founding Fathers put them in place to protect us from the tyranny of the other two branches of government. People think that I'm critical of judges, that I'm against judges. I'm not. They're our most important federal servants. And in fact, the judiciary, and this is where I part from some of my conservative brothers, in my view, is the most important branch of government because they're a check. But they must obey the law. They can't make law, and they can't wear their own politics and their own prejudices on their sleeves. And I've encountered some really bad judges. You can go back and listen to the last episode of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman just to hear about one of them. But this is what we're doing at Freedom Watch. This is why we need your strong support, because we have a Judicial Selection Strike Force Coalition. You can read about that at judicialselectionstrikeforce.org and at freedomwatch.org. We're recommending good, neutral, honest, independent judges to President Trump. There are over 100 vacancies to fill. We can now get good judges because, frankly, the judges that were put in place by Clinton and Obama and even to a large extent George W. Bush, a lot of them are just simply political hacks and incapable of being judges. We need the best and brightest on the bench. We need the best this country has to offer. And we need your help and we need your strong financial support to vet these judges and to interview them and recommend them to President Trump. And we're going to be working not just with him but with Congress to get these people nominated and confirmed. So this goes back to Justice Ginsburg. To have a justice like this on the Supreme Court tells you the flaws in the system, tells you what we're up against. And when you have a Supreme Court that thinks it's above the law, that does not have to adhere to ordinary standards of ethics, even for other judges, this nation is in double trouble, given what's been going on. Go to freedomwatchusa.org, see what we're doing. We'll be right back.
Before he was a trial lawyer, he sliced him and diced him.
People used to ask me, Larry, what caused you to start Judicial Watch and now Freedom Watch, given the powerful forces in this country that put you at risk?
In a meat packing plant.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
A very special prosecutor, Larry Klayman.
Be the one who makes our country great again. Go to freedomwatchusa.org and donate.
I want to conclude our show today with something that we started with. And that's this lawsuit that we brought against former FBI Director James Comey, against the FBI, against the National Security Agency and the other intelligence agencies, and even Barack Obama himself. We live in a police state. Judge Richard Leon recognized that. In fact, he called it almost Orwellian in the two favorable decisions that we were able to obtain at Freedom Watch going back to 2013 and 2014 against not just Obama and other government defendants, but the National Security Agency for mass surveillance. Judge Leon ruled that this was a violation of our Fourth Amendment. When we got those rulings, that triggered a new law called the USA Freedom Act, which required the telephone companies to keep our telephone communications in its possession until there was a valid warrant or a certification that probable cause existed, that communications with terrorists or a crime was being committed. But of course, we now know that that hasn't been adhered to. And we, of course, live in this now police state where you can't even make a phone call. And I'm a lawyer. I have to talk to my clients on the phone. I have attorney-client privilege. I have to talk to Mr. Montgomery on the phone and others. I assume that people are listening at all times, which means I have to communicate in person. And even that is not secure because we learned from WikiLeaks and information that came out that you can even turn on smart television and listen and watch what's going on in your own house, apartment, or office. I have a television in my office. I'm sure the NSA and all of the characters over there, the criminals, already know that. But this is the world we live in today. You know, go on our website. There is a cartoon. I have a section of our website at freedomwatchusa.org called Laugh or You Will Cry. It's not on the homepage anymore, but you can find it. And there's a meme of a cartoon with President Obama sitting at a lunch counter with a little 2-year-old baby. And the baby says to President Obama, he says, "My daddy tells me that you're listening in on all of our phone calls." And Obama responds, "He's not your dad." So it kind of tells you what we're dealing with here today. It's not funny, but it rings true. And we in this country were founded upon certain basic constitutional principles, and that is unreasonable searches and seizures, the same searches and seizures that King George III used to mete out against the colonialists, breaking into their houses, raping their women, beating up their families, stealing their property, violating any sense of decency. That's what gave rise to our revolution. It gave rise to the Declaration of Independence in 1776 in our native city of my native city of Philadelphia. This is the kind of thing that cannot continue. And as I said many times, if King George III had had the intelligence capabilities of our intelligence agencies and the FBI, our founding fathers never would have made it to Philadelphia. Their plans would have been revealed. They would have been arrested. They would have been incarcerated. They would have been executed before they got there. We wouldn't have a country today. And that's what we face. And you know what? We think that maybe because President Trump is now in charge of the executive branch of government, where these agencies reside, that things have stopped. But you know what? They haven't, because the people in control of these agencies are in the lower level. They are the Obama deep state. They are the Clinton deep state. They are the leftist deep state. Recently, Newt Gingrich came on Fox News and talked about how 97% of the lawyers in the Justice Department today, even though it's run by Attorney General Jeff Sessions, contributed and or voted for Hillary Clinton in the last election. The same's true in these intelligence agencies. And that's why all these leaks result. And what did we see this week with the leak? No rhyme intended. The only person that was indicted was a lower-level young girl in her early 20s who leaked a piece of intelligence information over alleged Russian surveillance. The higher-ups, the people like Comey, the people like James Clapper, who lied to Congress as Director of National Intelligence under oath, he committed perjury. John Brennan, that evil director of the CIA, someone who's reported to be a closet Muslim who has a prayer rug in his office and has tried to destroy President Trump, a clone of President Obama, and all the evil forces around him at the time. He hasn't been held accountable for any of these leaks. Nobody has at the higher level. They've only burned one lower-level official. And this is the Trump Justice Department. They need to really get a pair of cojones and start going after the people at the top. And I know that Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, is a man of integrity, and I look forward to him doing that on behalf of the American people. But that's why I brought this lawsuit, because we can't wait around for any Justice Department. We're your Justice Department. We brought the lawsuit against Comey and the others. Go to our website at freedomwatchusa.org, see what we've done, contribute generously to our cause, because you cannot depend on the federal government or even state governments to do our job. God bless you, God bless America, and God save America. We'll see you next week.